The moment lasted less than a second. One routine play. One collision at second base. And just like that, Kurt Russell's real dream was over. But here's what makes this story different. Because the world believes Kurt Russell became a movie star by choice. The truth is far darker than that. Hollywood was never the dream. It was what remained after everything else disappeared. Before the fame, before the legendary roles, before audiences knew his name, Kurt Russell was chasing a completely different life. A life that ended on a baseball field in 1973. A moment so sudden that even he didn't understand at first that everything had changed. And what happened after that injury didn't just change his career. It changed who he became. Because losing the one thing you love most does something to a person. It forces decisions. It creates pressure. And sometimes, it pushes you into a future you never planned to face. But here's the question that makes this story unsettling. What if the success everyone celebrates today was born from a moment of loss he never truly got over? What if the roles that made him famous only worked because something inside him had already broken? And the most surprising part, the man who would become one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces almost walked away from it all before it even began. Because at the beginning of this story, Kurt Russell wasn't trying to become a legend. He was trying to hold on to a dream that was already slipping away. And this is where the real story begins. Kurt Russell grew up in a house where baseball wasn't just a sport, it was identity. Dinner conversations revolved around games, players, strategy, and discipline. His father, Bing Russell, didn't teach baseball as a hobby. He taught it as a way of thinking. And from a young age, Kurt learned something that would later define his entire life. You show up, you work hard, and you don't complain when things get difficult. At the time, acting barely mattered to him. Film sets were simply part of the environment he grew up around. Something adults did. Something temporary. Baseball was permanent. Or at least, that's what he believed. And that belief made what happened later even harder to accept. As a teenager, Kurt wasn't just playing casually. He was good enough that people started noticing. Coaches saw potential. Scouts paid attention. And for the first time, the dream didn't feel distant anymore. It felt close. Real. Achievable. But while Kurt was moving closer to baseball, something else was quietly happening in the background. Hollywood was paying attention. Walt Disney himself noticed the young actor during a production and made a decision that would shape Kurt's future. He signed him to a long-term contract, predicting he would have a great acting career. For most teenagers, that would have been life-changing news. For Kurt, it was secondary. Because even while Disney was planning his future in film, Kurt was planning his future on a baseball field. Two lives moving forward at the same time. Two paths heading toward a decision he didn't know he would soon be forced to make. And that's where the pressure began. Because living two lives works, until one of them disappears. Through the early 1970s, Kurt balanced both worlds. On screen, he became the all-American Disney star audiences trusted. Off-screen, he trained, traveled, and competed as a serious baseball player. Not for fun. Not for publicity. For a career. Few people understood how serious he was. Fewer realized how close he came to leaving Hollywood completely. And then came the game that changed everything. It wasn't a championship. It wasn't a dramatic moment. Just another play developing the way it always had. The ball came in. Kurt turned for the throw. The runner came hard. Impact. The kind of collision players are trained to survive. Except this time, he didn't. The pain hit instantly. His shoulder, his throwing arm, damaged in a way that couldn't simply be shaken off. At first, he believed he'd recover. Athletes always do. You rest. You rehab. You come back stronger. But weeks passed. Then months. And the arm never returned to what it once was. And slowly, quietly, the truth became impossible to ignore. Baseball was over. No farewell game. No announcement. No moment to prepare. Just silence. The dream he had built since childhood ended in the middle of an ordinary season. And this is the part people rarely talk about. Because when a dream ends suddenly, the world expects you to move on quickly. But internally, something changes. The identity you built disappears, and you're left asking a question no one else can answer. Who are you now? For Kurt Russell, acting became the only path left. But stepping fully into Hollywood came with its own problem. The industry already thought it knew who he was. The Disney kid. Safe. Friendly. Predictable. And Kurt knew that version of himself wasn't real anymore. Because loss changes people. It hardens them. It makes them quieter, more focused. And soon, he would make a decision that shocked Hollywood, a role so different from his past that many believed it would destroy his career before it truly began. But instead, it did the opposite. And what happened next didn't just reinvent Kurt Russell. It created a completely new kind of movie star. Kurt Russell understood something most young actors never realize. Being successful too early can quietly trap you. By the mid-1970s, audiences already recognized his face. Studios knew his name. But recognition wasn't the same as respect. In Hollywood's eyes, he was still the clean-cut Disney star, the safe choice for family roles, the actor who smiled at the right moments and never caused trouble. And that image began to suffocate him. Because off-screen, Kurt wasn't that person anymore. The injury had changed him. Losing baseball had taken away certainty, and in its place came something else: urgency. A need to prove that he was more than what people expected. More than the roles written for him. But Hollywood doesn't like sudden change. Studios invest in familiarity. Audiences trust consistency. And when an actor tries to break away from a successful image, careers often collapse overnight. Kurt knew that risk. And he took it anyway. The late 1970s became a turning point. Instead of choosing safe roles, he started moving toward characters with edges, men who weren't perfect, who carried tension beneath the surface. It confused executives. Some believed he was making a mistake. Others thought he was throwing away the only identity that worked for him. But what they didn't understand was this. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself for fame. He was trying to become believable again. Because once you lose a dream, pretending becomes impossible. And then came the meeting that changed everything. Director John Carpenter saw something different in Kurt Russell. Not the Disney image. Not the former athlete. He saw intensity, the kind that comes from someone who has already experienced failure and survived it. Their collaboration would become one of the most important partnerships of Kurt's career. But at the time, it looked like a gamble. When Kurt was cast in Escape from New York, many people questioned the decision. He didn't look like a traditional action star. He didn't have the intimidating reputation studios preferred. Critics expected the film to fail. Instead, something unexpected happened. Audiences believed him. Snake Plissken wasn't polished. He wasn't heroic in the traditional sense. He was quiet, dangerous, and tired of the world around him. And for the first time, viewers saw Kurt Russell not as a former child actor, but as someone entirely new. And the transformation was instant. But success brought a new kind of pressure. Because now the expectation was different. He wasn't trying to escape an old image anymore. He had to prove the new one wasn't temporary. And Hollywood has a short memory. One failed film can erase years of progress. Throughout the 1980s, Kurt moved between genres in ways few actors attempted. Action, comedy, drama, each role slightly different, each performance pushing further away from the image he once carried. Films like The Thing would later become classics, but at the time, reactions were mixed. Some projects struggled at the box office. Critics didn't always understand what he was trying to do, and that uncertainty followed him. Because behind every successful performance was the same unspoken fear: what if this disappears too? Athletes understand this feeling well. Careers can end suddenly. One moment you're at the top, the next you're forgotten. And that mindset never fully left him after baseball. It made him careful. Private. Focused on the work rather than the spotlight. While other stars chased publicity, Kurt stayed quiet. He avoided scandals. Rarely explained himself. Let the roles speak instead. But that silence created its own mystery. Fans saw confidence on screen, yet off screen he remained distant, almost guarded. And those who worked closely with him noticed something else, a discipline that felt more like an athlete than an actor. Because in many ways, he never stopped being one. Every role became preparation. Every film another chance to prove he still belonged. Not because Hollywood demanded it, but because losing baseball had taught him how quickly everything could vanish. And just when his career seemed stable, another unexpected challenge appeared. The industry itself began changing. New action stars emerged. Bigger budgets. Bigger explosions. A new generation dominating the box office. For many actors of his era, this was where careers slowly faded into supporting roles and nostalgia appearances. But Kurt Russell did something different again. Instead of competing, he adapted. He leaned into experience. Into characters with history and weight. Men who had lived through failure, regret, and survival. Roles that younger actors couldn't easily replicate. And audiences responded. Because by then, something unique had happened. Kurt Russell wasn't just playing characters anymore. He felt like someone who had lived them. Someone who understood loss. Someone who understood starting over. And maybe that's why his performances aged differently than others from the same era. But here's the part most people never consider. If that injury had never happened, none of this would exist. No reinvention. No iconic roles. No Hollywood legacy. Just a baseball career that might have ended quietly years later. Which raises a strange question. Did losing his first dream actually give him the life he was meant to have? Or did success simply become the way he learned to live with what he lost? Because even decades later, people close to him say one thing never fully changed. He still watched baseball the same way, not as a fan, but as someone imagining what could have been. And sometimes, the hardest victories come from paths you never wanted to take. And as the years passed, something strange began to happen. The roles became bigger. The respect became stronger. New generations discovered his films and saw him not as a former Disney actor, not as a man who lost a sports career, but as a symbol of consistency in an industry where almost nothing lasts. From Escape from New York to The Thing, from action hero to seasoned character actor, Kurt Russell had already done what most actors spend a lifetime chasing. He survived change. But here's the part that makes the ending of this story different. Because success didn't erase the past. It simply grew around it. People often assume that when someone becomes famous, the earlier pain disappears. That winning replaces losing. That new dreams cancel old ones. But real life doesn't work that way. The truth is, some moments never leave you. They just become quieter. And for Kurt Russell, that baseball field in 1973 never completely faded away. It became the invisible turning point, the moment that forced him into a life he never planned yet somehow mastered. And maybe that's why audiences always felt something real in his performances. Not just confidence. Not just charisma. But resilience. Because every time he played a man fighting against impossible odds, there was something honest behind it. He knew what it meant to lose something permanent. He knew what it felt like to start again when no one was watching. And that authenticity can't be taught. It can only be lived. Looking back now, the story feels almost unbelievable. A young athlete loses his future in a single moment, only to become one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. A setback that looked like an ending quietly becoming a beginning. But here's the final twist. The moment that seemed like the worst thing that ever happened to him may have been the reason millions of people know his name today. Because if that collision never happened, Kurt Russell might have lived a good life. Just not this one. And maybe that's the real reason this story stays with people. Not because it's about fame. Not because it's about movies. But because it reminds us of something uncomfortable and powerful at the same time. Sometimes the door that closes without warning is the one that pushes you toward who you were meant to become. The dream ended. The story didn't. And in the end, the man who thought he lost everything in 1 second became proof that losing one life can sometimes be the only way another one begins. And that's why, decades later, Kurt Russell's journey still feels unfinished. Because behind every success story, there's a moment no one celebrates. The moment everything almost fell apart. And without that moment, there would be no legend at all.